Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I'm your host, Stephen Peinecker, and yes, it is a Mormon Book Reviews episode. It's not a Mormon Media Reviews because we're here to talk about a book. Rebecca, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Sometimes I do cross over. I'm mostly on Mormon Media Reviews, but every once in a while, when a book really grabs me or I have a connection to it, I kind of twist Steve's arm and have him put me on Mormon Book Reviews too.
So it's always a pleasure to have Rebecca on as a co-host. Just a reminder, this month's book giveaway is a preparatory redemption, reading Alma 12 through 13, edited by my friends Matt Bowman and Rosemary Demos. And the reason why I got it is because my good friend Bridget Jack Jeffrey wrote an article in it entitled "Called and Ordained, a Priesthood of All Believers in Alma 13." Now, Bridget is a evangelical Christian who is a graduate of Brigham Young University, and she is currently working on her PhD at Trinity Evangelical Seminary just outside of Chicago, my old stomping grounds. And so she sent me an extra copy. I love this book. I love the fact that the Protestant doctrine of the priesthood of all believers is taught in Alma 13, which I think is a really cool area where we can bridge is good bridge building opportunity between our camps. And this is what this channel is all about. We were just talking off camera how in the Switzerland of Mormonism and all this kind of stuff. And I do appreciate all the kind words I've been getting from people, by the way. I've been getting a lot of people reach out to me. They send me emails, and I just want to let you know, I read every comment. I read every email. I can't respond to all of them, but I want you to know that I do hear all your voices. And of course, this is the place where all the voices of restoration will be heard. So Rebecca, you reached out to me and you told me about a friend that you and Tom have, and your husband, and her name is Katherine, and told me that she has a very unique story and that you had run into her at the last general conference and you thought she would make a great guest for this program. And so, Rebecca, why don't you tell us a little bit about Katherine and introduce her to the audience?
Well, first of all, welcome, Katherine. We're so excited that you're here. My husband, Tom, has been saying forever, Rebecca, Katherine would be the most amazing guest on Steve's show. So we've been trying to set this up for a while. And I have to say, I think it must have been written in the stars because, we had that in the back of our mind. Let's have Katherine on at some point. We'll make this happen. So my co-host on Mormonish podcast, Landon, my husband, Tom, and I, and some others went to Temple Square during conference weekend this last April, just to we didn't have tickets or anything, but we were just going to soak up the ambiance and walk around conference. And we round a corner, and who do we see? It's Katherine. And she's got a box of books, and she's smiling, and she's waving, and she's handing out her book, Translucent: How I Put Off My Natural Man and Found a Spiritual Woman. And she's, close up. Here it is. She's handing out these copies, signed, of course. I always like to brag when I have a signed copy. So we had, a nice little conversation for a minute there and took the book home. And I think I called you right away or texted you, Steve, and I said, oh my gosh, okay, we've got to have her on now. Started looking into the book, and even more, I was like, Steve, this is a very unique, very interesting story. So I would have to say meant to be, right? I mean, what are the odds? Although now that I've read the book, I understand the odds are a little great because Katherine, as we'll find out later, frequents Temple Square. But yeah, we're really excited to be able to talk to you today for sure.
Yeah, and so Katherine, welcome to the show. The name of your book is Translucent, and we're here to have a wonderful conversation with you. Really, thank you for taking the time to do this today.
Oh, no problem. I'm so glad to be invited onto the show.
So the thing about what makes this story so unique is that Katherine is a faithful member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And Katherine is a transgender woman, and she tells her story in this book. It's actually, you get to really get to know you. You write in a very accessible way. And Katherine, this is a unique story because a lot of people would have you're a faithful member, and you are faithful. You quote from the prophets, you quote from your scriptures, and you believe that God has led you to. God basically told you to write this book, and so you feel led by the Spirit to do these things. So I just want to know a little bit about your background. Maybe tell us a little bit about your past, where you were born, your familial situation, and maybe what's interesting is at a very, very young age, 3 years old, you identified as a woman, as a girl. So maybe just talk a little bit about your past and go from there.
Okay. I'm from Southern California, born in the mid-60s. So yeah, I'm a California girl. I grew up on the beaches. My parents took us up into the mountains, camping, Disneyland, all of that. So my family background, longtime members of the church, going back generations. I've got pioneer ancestors, the kind that you hear about in conference. My great-great-grandfather built the Kirtland Temple. And so the church is very deep in my family on both sides. And so I was born into the church and raised in it my whole life. And yeah, at the age of 3, I came out to my parents and told them I was a girl, which I don't know much about or remember much, but I assume it didn't go well. Because it got buried and I had to hide it. But when I was around 13, and having to deal with the gender dysphoria from early grade school as puberty started to develop, I wrote down my feelings and I promised myself I would never write that down. This was a secret, something you could never get out. And but I, trying to deal with it as a form of therapy, I wrote it down. And then the next thing I found out, I was meeting with a therapist in 1979. And I began transitioning in my senior year of high school. And that ends in around 1983, 84. So yeah, I'm not a late bloomer. And so
And just actually real quick, Katherine, just so because not maybe our audience isn't familiar with all the terms, what is gender dysmorphia? Maybe just tell them what it is.
Gender dysphoria is when you have this, I don't know, I'm trying to describe something that that only I know what it feels like to somebody else.
Right.
It's a disconnect between how you identify and how you see yourself. You don't see yourself in the mirror. You look in the mirror and you see this guy, and that's not you, because you're this girl, and people identify you as a guy, but you're not. And it's this feeling always inside of you that you're a girl, and it's informing you a girl. You know you're a girl, but other people don't see you that way. And that's why we call it transgender, because you've crossed over. You don't identify as how you were to the gender you were assigned at birth. And so, which is the best definition of trans. It's like I was assigned male at birth because of my outward genitalia, but internally is not how I understand myself. And it's been this way since a very young age. And trying to deal with that. And that's the hard part, is how do you deal with that? And so
you say you started transitioning when you're in high school. So when you say you started transitioning, what does that look like? What did you start doing?
Oh, I mean, it's stereotypical. I started growing my hair out and letting my fingernails grow longer, and trying to, with what I had, to sort of change up how I was dressing. I mean, it was the early 80s, you know. And while a lot of rock stars could get away with stuff, being this Mormon kid in Utah is fairly limiting of what you could do. And I mean, in that Mormon community, and well, in almost any community, and it's probably not just Mormons, but you know, how do you come out as a girl and be accepted at that point in time? I mean, if you're a famous rock star, sure, you can be David Bowie or Boy George, or you know, Adam Ant or whatever, and wear makeup and whatever you want and express yourself, and everybody's like, oh yeah, they're just, you know, this musician, whatever, or artist or whatnot. But you're just down in the trenches as a normal kid, you know, doing that sort of thing. And it was Utah. It wasn't like it was West Hollywood. So I never knew any gay people until I got into college. And so there wasn't a culture here where that would ever be allowed. And so you kind of have to hide that and play it safe and keep those things to yourself, because if you came out, how is society going to understand you and treat you? I mean, it's not like gays were being treated well at all. And
Okay.
even at that time, even into the 90s, gays were not being treated well by society at large. And so trans was this other thing. I mean, unless you got to be some famous trans person, like there has been. And it's not like there weren't trans people transitioning. I mean, Wendy Carlos was amazing in inventing the synthesizer and Moog and being able to create all the music I grew up loving and stuff. And she started transitioning. She transitioned, I believe, in the late 60s. And that, but she was in New York. But so there have people have transitioned and they made the news and stuff. But just being sort of a normal person where I was at, couldn't do it. So dealing with those feelings, one of the ways to deal with them is to be able to visualize yourself as a gender you identify. So one of the easiest ways to do that is to grow your hair out, which everybody thought I was a hippie or a rocker or on drugs or something. And
yeah, I was going to say in Utah, that's the stigma. I mean, I had boys that had long hair, great boys, active in the church boys, and boy, were they slammed just for the hair. Literally, it was very negative. So unfortunately, just for the hair alone.
Yeah. And when I became a programmer, people were like, oh, you're like one of those Berkeley programmer guys. Sure. We like them, if you're into programming, the longer the hair, the better, it must be a better engineer. But I still ran into problems. I was working at a company and they were like, we had some guests come in and they saw me and they're like, oh, we like you guys because you've got real programmers, because, your programmers have long hair. And then a few months later, they had some other customers come in and they're meeting, and I was supposed to meet with them. And afterwards, I was like, you didn't come and get me for the meeting. They're like, yeah, that wouldn't have worked out well. They wouldn't have liked, having some guy with long hair. And so, being the boy in Utah with long hair is not a good thing. And so I had that discrimination in how I was treated in both the church and socially, and that I had people asking me for cigarettes and drugs on the bus all the time going to college, and when I was at a club dancing and stuff, and I'm like, no, sorry, never done it. Just
not that person.
No.
Were they trying to, were people thinking, oh, well, obviously the hair will be cut when it's time for a mission. I think that sometimes people think, okay, they're going to clean up their act, the hair will be cut, time to go on a mission. Did you feel that pressure or anything like that?
I will say there was no pressure for me to go on a mission after high school. Okay. I mean, it was a thing growing up of, you're one of our sons, you'll go on a mission like your dad. And my brother went on a mission, and there was an expectation. And I think I always sort of thought, I'll go. But by the time I got to that point of 19 years old, I had grown my hair out, and it was helping with the dysphoria big time. And I was able to survive at that point. And so by the time the bishop came to invite me to go on a mission, there was no way I could do it. To cut my hair that short, I'd never had my hair that short in my life. My mom believed in the Disney style of boys' haircuts that were a bit longer instead of the missionary thing. And so I couldn't imagine cutting it like that and wearing a suit, which I'd never owned, and doing that for 2 years and pretending to be this sort of, I mean, missionary is not really manly, but I mean, it's in that way, but it's still, you're projecting that maleness the whole time. And I just knew I couldn't do it. And I know a lot of trans girls who did do it, and some of them quite successfully. They got through their missions well, and some of them survived, and some of them didn't at all and came home early or whatever, and weren't able to handle it. So yeah, it's so that's part of it. And also being LDS, of going through that, of you just build into it that this internal shame of normal people don't do this, so it must be wrong. And so what I'm doing is breaking some commandment, which I'm not sure what it is. But you can't, because you can't tell anybody. I mean, you're raised with that whole thing. I mean, did you take a cookie? No, I didn't take a cookie. You did. I mean, as a kid, you're taught, when you did something wrong, do you lie about it? And you hide some things because dad told you not to do that, or from Sunday school not to do something. And so we get into that thing of Cain and Abel, or Adam and Eve. It's like, did you eat of the fruit? Where's your brother? I don't know.
It's a survival mechanism, I think.
It's a survival
to
thing.
survive, and you learn it. Yeah.
Because you're hiding that, it builds in that shame of, I'm doing something wrong, because everybody is going to think you're doing something wrong. And so the longer it goes on, the more shame you feel, and it builds on you, which is why it's so amazing when you can finally come out and express that and be yourself. Is somebody important said, the truth will set you free. And it really is of liberating, of being able to be out and be able to express who you are, even with all the difficulties that come with that. Because there's consequences. There's consequences to being in the closet, and there's consequences coming out of the closet. And you're kind of flopping your life around. Of all the people in my life were happy when I was in the closet, and I was miserable. And when you come out of the closet, you're happy, but most of the people in your life are now miserable. And in many cases, I don't know, some people have situations where they come out of the closet and everybody's like, yay, and it's a really great experience. But with some people, it's like they come out of the closet and everybody's like, ew. And so, people's mileage may vary.
So now you're going to school. So we're going into the college years. Maybe just talk about your time as a college student and relationships and all that kind of stuff that were happening as well. However you want to get into that.
Oh, college was a very brief experience. I managed to take my 3.6 GPA to 0.4 in about a year, because while I was dealing with the dysphoria, it was really distracting. And so focusing on school, what really wasn't happening. So I got tossed from the University of Utah twice. And but I also, during those years, dealt with suicide, and I actually went to take my life, and which was a important event in my life. And
talk about that. Talk about because you were actually, you didn't leave a note, you were just going to do it. Maybe talk about what happened there. And also, by the way, Were you seeing any therapists at this time? I mean, anything like that?
I'd seen a couple.
Okay.
During this time, I don't know, I was trying to find how to deal with this. And I did go to the church's family services. They have therapists, which are free, with a note from your bishop. I don't know that I told the bishop why I wanted to see one, but he's looking across the desk at this boy with long hair, and things. Probably, yeah, there's things going on there.
You probably assumed drugs.
Probably,
right?
yeah.
Probably thought it was drugs.
So yeah, I went and saw one, but in my head, the only thing I could figure out it was multiple personalities. Or whatever they call it today, dissociative disorder, whatever, yeah, that was my thing, because why am I thinking like a girl and identifying this way I'm not supposed to? And so I went in going, yeah, I think I have multiple personalities. And he talked to me for all of a couple of minutes, asked me some question, and he's like, no, no, you're not. And so after a couple sessions, I was like, this isn't going anywhere. And so I stopped. And so I did that twice. And I realized that they apparently couldn't help me. So I didn't. No, I wasn't. And so I was dealing with this all internally, and I'd failed out of school, couldn't find a job, didn't have any friends, not going on a mission, and just everything seemed to be falling apart. And a lot of it was being driven by my situation. And so I just finally was like, I can't handle this. Well, I was having my parents finally sort of were realizing this hadn't gone away, and they knew about it, but I don't think they realized how much I was struggling with it, because I think they were also in deep denial over it, and still are today. And so yeah, I went to kill myself, and I went up the canyon above my house, and I didn't tell anybody, and I didn't leave a note, and that was just going to be the end of it. And I got there to the back of the canyon, and as I had been thinking about this the whole time, and got there to the back, and I think I said a prayer. I mean, I was talking to God as I sat there on the log, and I'm like, I'm done. I'm tired of this. Nobody loves me. I'm leaving, and I'm just tired of this whole life. And this feeling came to me, and there wasn't really words, but it was just that sense of which I'd felt before several years earlier from an experience in high school of, no, I'm still here. I love you. And that really hit me as I sat there. And I just was, okay, if God can love me, then maybe I can get through this. And so I ended up getting back out of the canyon, showed up back home, and my parents had no idea where I'd gone, what had just happened, and I didn't tell them. And anyway, so, and that caused me to sort of turn around from where I was at, of like, how am I going to get through this? And so I started coming up with ideas and stuff, and I started turning my life around. So yeah, one of the things I decided I needed to get through this was a girlfriend.
Okay.
A lot of people arrive at that decision.
Yeah, the smart ones. Sorry, Steve. So yeah, it was, I admit it's probably a little self-serving, but I mean, it was I was attracted to women, but I needed a woman in my life who could help me. And so I did. It took about a year of praying and stuff, but yeah, I did meet someone. And I had one of those infamous BYU incidents of, as soon as I saw her, I knew I was going to marry her. She was like, I don't know, 30 yards away, and I saw her with my friend, and as soon as I saw her, I was like, that's who I'm going to marry.
Wow.
So
Now-
yeah, BYU doesn't have the monopoly on that. It does happen in pagan places like the University of Utah. And I did. So I don't know. I've talked a while.
So
no, you're the guest. That's why we want you to talk.
All right, I'm supposed to fill up the time. You just sit there. I'll keep talking.
We just sit there and stare at you. That's how it goes. But no, this is a very unique and wonderful relationship as I read the book, because your wife, she knew you, she knew everything about you, and like you said, you guys were very much, you were together in every way and helping each other. So I thought that was a very interesting part of the story, and you did get married.
Yeah. She finally asked me after 6 years.
Wow, that's amazing.
She got to wear the dress, though.
There you go. But there were some things you had to work through to be married in the temple. There was a little confusion and back and forth. I don't know if you want. I found that extremely interesting, especially back in the day. It's my era too. I think we're about the same age. I think I'm a little older than you, Katherine, but I think we're. I remember the era. So.
Well, yeah, because you're supposed, you're raised your whole life as a young woman of, you need to be, a good Latter-day Saint. You need to pay we're raised on that our whole life of, you have to pay your tithing, you have to keep chaste, you have to keep the word of wisdom, you have to go to church, you have to have a testimony. I mean, all of these things that we're taught of to be worthy to go to the temple. Well, okay, I was doing all of those. And I was doing this other thing. And it was like, that I can't tell anybody, so it must be wrong. And, okay, nobody's standing at the pulpit or there in class going, oh, and by the way, guys, don't wear women's clothes. As a thing. But it's still hidden, so it must be wrong. Lots of shame. So how do you get married in the temple, and how do you feel worthy enough to go to the temple when you have all that shame? And so there was a time when we decided to get married. We thought it'd be great to get married on Leap Day in the Los Angeles temple. And so I went to the bishop and I brought it up, and he said, oh, I need to talk to people about this. And a couple of weeks later, he brought me back in and said, yeah, we're not a fan of that. And you need to stop for 6 months and cut your hair, and we'll talk again. So I went home and told my family and my girlfriend, or I guess fiance then, sort of. And so I went and got my hair chopped. And okay, it wasn't short, it wasn't missionary, but I felt it was enough of a sacrifice. And I dug out some old guy clothes, and I managed to get through that for 6 months. And I went back, and he said, yeah, you didn't cut your hair short enough, and I'm not sure that you're really giving this up. And I was like sitting there going, no, really, I haven't. Because, next week I was going to, after I got married in the temple, I was going to go back to, being a girl in private. And
did you tell the bishop, my fiance, she understands me, she accepts me, we are a couple? I mean, did he understand that?
I don't think he ever talked to her, but technically we were in the same ward.
Okay.
So even back then you could change wards a lot easier. Right, so she had moved her records to my ward, even though she lived 20 miles away. And so I think she was serving in the nursery or something. I was elders quorum teacher. And yeah, so I mean, he knew who she was and knew that we were dating and that. And so going in and saying, yeah, I need to recommend to go to the temple, get married, he knew. But we didn't, I don't think he talked to her ever about this or really learned what she knew or felt about it or whatnot. So that really didn't really come into the picture. But yeah, so when he turned me down, I was like, okay, I'm done. And I'm not sure I'm proud of that, but yeah, I mean, back then it was like, okay, I'm done with this. And I went home and dug out my girl clothes and went back. I was like, okay, we tried. And then a couple of years later, she she asked me to marry her and even scheduled a date in the Salt Lake Temple, and which was 3 weeks. And I was like, how am I going to do this? We tried this like 2 years ago. My hair was long again. I was back to wearing women's clothes all day, every day. And how do we do this? And it was I'm not proud of it, but I decided that it was the Clinton eras. Don't ask, don't tell. And I was like, if they don't ask about it, I'm not going to tell about it. And if God wants them to know, he'll tell them. Let them know that something's wrong. Let them know. I totally, bishops, stake presidents can receive revelation, inspiration, have that gift of discernment. And I was like, if this is going to be bad, then wrong, then he can tell them. And so I wasn't, it was the only plan I had. and it wasn't a good one. No, don't do this at home. And so that's why I went in, and I didn't bring it up. He didn't ask about it, and I walked out with a recommend.
Fascinating.
And we got married, and I felt guilty about it for years. Add one more thing to the pile.
Yeah, and this is throughout the book, basically, it's your story of how you are a faithful Latter-day Saint, and you are trying to walk through this, trying to go and follow what the prophets want you to do and what your churches teaches, and you want to be a participant in local ward activities. In some places you have the door shut, and other places the doors are open, and that's kind of just what's happening. And so you're a very unique person, because you're being a trailblazer in many ways, because you are engaging, you are a member of the church, and you want to be a full participant in the church. And so maybe just talk about how that's been for you to negotiate in that world, because you get mixed messages all the time.
I guess, I mean, yeah, I want to be a full participant, and I try to be a full participant. I want to go to my meetings. I want to have a calling. Give me a stack of Book of Mormons. I'll put my hand on it and swear, before everybody that, President Nelson is a prophet and leader of God's restored church today. Joseph Smith was a prophet of the restoration. I mean, the Book of Mormon is, scripture. I mean, all of that. I see myself as a fully believing, active member of the church. That's where I'm at. And even with this whole trans thing, hasn't swayed that at all. It's just how I am and how I want to participate. And so that's, it gets difficult, because then it's like, you get the other people is like, well, what you're doing is not quite right. and it's difficult to understand, exactly what am I doing wrong, or how they see what I'm doing is wrong. Okay. For a lot of people, it's not really a mystery. Here you have a guy in a dress. That's not a mystery of what's going wrong. But to me, it is sort of because of how I see things, what I know about myself. And so I just, I would love to go on a mission. I would love to go back to the temple. I would love to go proselyte and teach. I mean, I'm sure there's lots of people out there who would love to be taught by a trans woman, teaching them about the gospel, because, if a trans woman can be an active believing member of the church and have that testimony, then why can't you? It's sort of, Mormons aren't all cookie cutter of the same thing. I'm over here I'm not normal. I'm not in that bell curve. I'm out on the edge. But I can still have that mainstream testimony of the church and belief. And that's probably why it's really kind of weird and difficult. And so, and right now, culturally, trans is a, very politically minefield.
Yeah.
And culturally, and what's going on out there in legislatures and states and people's beliefs. And there is all sorts of noise about, what it means to be transgender and what rights and what they want to do and stuff. And it's very confusing to people. And what they see on the news or they're reading on websites and that, it's like, ew, I don't want that anywhere near me. And, I look at a lot of them and go, ew, I don't want that anywhere near me.
Well, that's the thing too, Katherine, because not only are you in this minefield of the church, but I have to deal with the LGBTQ community, and you have varying degrees of acceptance or pushback from people that don't appreciate what you're doing. So you're put in a very tough spot, because you don't have the supports. You don't have as much of a support system as you probably need, for whether it's from the LGBTQ community or from your church community. And so that must be a really hard place to be in.
It is, because I'm ultra conservative. I'm hardcore Republican. Did I vote for Trump? No. Do I like him? No. So I'm for those who are old enough, you would probably count me as a Goldwater Reagan Republican in my beliefs. So I'm not, I kind of have left the Republican Party somewhere around George Bush II. And so I don't identify with a lot of the ideology of the Republican Party today, but I'm still a conservative in what I believe for socially and as a government, of what government should be doing, is much more of a Goldwater, Coolidge sort of a thing. And in that respect, so which puts me on the outs a lot with a lot of the Republican Party today. But as a conservative, that's not seen as particularly popular in the LGBT community, because the last transgender US survey of 2015 was 89% of trans people are liberal, and only 1% are ultra conservative like me. So I'm very much out on the edge of the LGBT community. And I don't agree with a lot of what the LGBT community does or what they're pushing for. And so they're like, oh, you're trans, come on in. And I'm like, okay, this is what I believe in. This, like, okay, you stand over there. You're not really with us. And it's like, hey, I'm LDS. And it's like, and I'm transgender. Oh, well, you're not really with us. Go stand over there. Maybe you should go with your people. Yeah, and it's like, wait, who's my people? Oh, the rainbow people? not so much.
Mm.
Yeah, I found that really interesting in the book. I mean, you're talking about your politics and that, but also within the LDS community, you have these groups formed, you know, active LDS, but they formed to sort of support the LGBTQ community. A lot of times you mentioned like around their children, perhaps, to try to encourage the church maybe to, you know, change or to make it a better scenario for the kids. And you mentioned that sometimes in those groups, they don't understand you because you're saying, no, listen to the prophet, or you don't understand what, you know, you're kind of maybe seen as defending the
Well,
church in these
well,
groups, and they're like, no. So it's a very interesting juxtaposition, I think.
there's two kinds of those groups.
Right.
I mean, you've got the liberal LDS LGBT groups, which are
Yes.
very much affirming and accepting of LGBT people, but they get to this thing of, yeah, don't listen to the prophet. You know,
Mhm.
the church might be true and that, but it's run by bigoted old men who don't understand, and it's not really what God wants, and that sort of thing. And really, while that's really nice, it's really hard on testimonies. And
Right.
I've seen so many people get into those groups and go, hey, here's a whole bunch of other LDS people who are LGBT, and then I see their testimonies rot away. And usually within a couple of years, all of these people are inactive, they've resigned from the church, and they're not really part of the LDS community anymore because of their attitudes towards the church. They lose their testimonies. And so I've learned not to hang out with those groups. I mean, I've been in a lot that start from scratch, and they're like really great, yeah, we're pro on the church, we're going to go to church and have speakers, and we're going to be really good. And then over time it's just and it's like, okay, I'm out of here. Yeah, I can't go there with you with how you are describing my prophet, these men who are prophets, seers, and revelators. That doesn't work for me, and I don't want that to happen to me. And then you've got the more conservative LDS LGBT groups, which are like, okay, you're gay or you're trans, we love you and stuff, but here's the rules. You can't be in a gay relationship. There's no marriage, there's no relationship, there's no hand holding, no touching, no kissing, and all of that for you who are same-sex attracted. Because we can't even really go as far to call you gay because or you're trans. Well, that's nice. Okay. But we're not really big on transition and that, and we would prefer you don't transition because that would seem to be wrong. And so it's sort of like, oh, so where am I going to be at? There's no real middle ground there either. And so trying to find that support even in the LDS LGBT community of what works for you. And I mean, that's really great if you're like a gay man and you're like, I mean, the church is really firm on that of like, no gay sex or no gay relationships of a romantic nature or sexual nature. And it's like, okay, and if you're fine with that and want to be and go that path of being celibate and staying in the church that way, okay, and that's really helpful and supportive to them. But as soon as you go into a thing of like, no, I really want to have that gay relationship, romantic relationship, then it's sort of, you fall out because they won't support you there. And so you naturally kind of fall out of the group. Well, where do you go? You go to the other group where they're accepting of that, but they're not accepting of the church. And so
that was a theme in the book, just the mixed messages I felt. And I felt such great empathy for you because I thought, and I think we'd love to talk about transmission, right? Because you are a very faithful, you are proselytizing. I would love for you to tell everybody about that. And then what I felt, I mean, I told Steve, I actually threw the book a couple times because the treatment of you, no, the treatment as you are out bearing your testimony, telling your story, and the mixed messages, you know, and you can talk about this, but to me, it was like in one ward, they love you, they're crying. You attend another ward and they tell you at the door not to come in. I felt such empathy for you and I was really frustrated. So I was kind of throwing the book. So I would love for you to tell,
Well,
I think,
I'll
Steve,
send you a new one.
Yeah, I mean, no, it's okay. It's still okay. You know, if a book
Okay.
doesn't impact you, it's not a good book, right? But transmission, tell everyone about that and just the different treatment and messages. You know, it just shows that, like you said, there's not a solid answer to this, and people are nobody knows what to do exactly.
Well, I called it my transmission, but I should clarify, this isn't a mission of proselytizing becoming transgender.
Right. Exactly.
It's not going out and grooming of like, oh, I want to turn people trans. No, I mean, my gosh.
No, you're sharing the gospel. You're sharing your testimony is what you're doing.
Yeah, it's sharing the gospel and my testimony. It's not about making people trans or wanting more, because this is hard. This is really, really, really hard, and it's a hard life. And why would I want anybody to do that? And so I kind of got called in a way by God to proselytize, is maybe a word, but of not that people should be transgender, but what does it mean to be transgender and a member of the church? And what are people's view of people who are transgender? And so there were two things that kind of came out. I didn't explicitly decide to do this. This all kind of happened organically, and I think in a way I could say led to do it by God to do it. It wasn't something I was this activist and went, how do I go out there and do this? I need to educate people. I need to, you know, go out and do this like some radical activist or something like that. No, that's not me. I try to keep my head down and just live my life. But one of the things is I go, like you saw, is that I started going to general conference and standing on a corner with a sign that said hug a transgender Latter-day Saint with my friend Peter Mosman had been doing that for a couple of years.
Oh, there's the picture
of doing that as a gay man. He had a sign that said hug a gay Mormon, and I'd seen him there, and I met him and kind of became friends, and I was like, I just felt I needed to do this. And so I did it, and it's been an amazing, wonderful experience. And I have leaders of the church who know me, and I just saw a whole bunch of them at BYU's women's conference a couple months ago, and they all said hi to me and waved to me because they all recognized me from being there, even though they don't stop to talk to me at conference because they're busy going to get their lunch and get their seats. They don't have time. Right. But they really do all recognize me. And I said, yeah, I'm thinking of stopping doing it. And they're all like, no, keep coming. We love you there. And so that was really amazing to me, is here are these church leaders saying, no, we want you to keep being there. We love you being there. And so that was one thing. And I had some amazing spiritual experiences there, which you can read about. But the other thing was I sort of got into this thing of I didn't have a ward to go to. My ward ostracized me 6 years ago when I came out. And so I gave it a year, and then I left, and I asked God, where do I go to church? And he told me where to go. And And I've had a whole bunch of really amazing experiences through that of, I just attend church. I don't call attention to myself. I just go to church. And when it's testimony meeting on the first Sunday of the month, would get up and bear my testimony, just like any other member about what I know to be true in the church. And
these are all different wards. In the back of your book, you've got a list of the different wards that you're going to and bearing your testimony and sharing your message and your story.
I went to over 40 wards in 3 years. Yes. Which is, mathematically, since there's only one first Sunday of the month that they do testimony meeting, to be able to bear my testimony in over 40 wards in 3 months is, there were a couple months that for whatever reason, there were 2 testimony meetings, one in one ward and then another ward because they had state conference or something, they shifted where testimony meeting was, and things. But but I would just bear a normal testimony, but I would end it with, my name is Katherine, I'm a daughter of God, and I was born transgender. And the book goes into the reason why I came to say that, but it wasn't about being transgender. I wanted that kid like me who was sitting there in the congregation, who was still in the closet, or maybe was out and was struggling, sort of like I was, of how do I deal with this in the church? How do I come out? How do I, do I need to go and kill myself? Or do I need to leave the church? And I wanted them to know that I had a testimony, I was here, I was active, I'm believing, and if I can be here, they can too. They don't need to leave this life. They don't need to leave the church. And from all reports, the church right now has a problem with kids leaving the church, and a lot of it is over LGBT issues. I don't know really how big of a problem that is. I mean, it makes the newspaper, so I don't know. But and so I know it's an issue. I don't know how big an issue, but I've seen it's an issue because I've seen these kids as I've tried to volunteer in places, and I've talked to them after these meetings and stuff, is, when that kid comes to you and says afterwards, or even at conference, the kids will come and give me a hug and they'll whisper in my ear and say, I'm trans. And their friends are standing 15 feet away wondering why they're giving me a hug. And, because they still haven't come out yet. It's just, I want them to know. I mean, it doesn't do any good to go up and bear a testimony and then sit down and then, it doesn't mean anything. So, I mean, being transgender wasn't a thing of proselyting, I'm transgender, you should be transgender. It was a thing of, it's that thing in the church of like, back many decades ago, if a Black person got up and bore their testimony, you'd be like, oh my gosh, there's a Black person who's a member of the church and has a testimony, because you'd be like, that's really amazing. But you could see that they were Black. Or you can see a lot of people's demographics of, oh, it's a woman, or it's a man, or it's this race or that race, or they're disabled and blind, or, or they have Down syndrome. Or, I was in one ward where it became Down syndrome testimony of, there was a Down syndrome person, and who, I don't know how old they were, but, got up and bore their testimony. And then several other people got up and talked about it too and stuff. And it's like, you get those things of people have these identities in a way. Not, I don't know, having Down syndrome is really like one of those identities, but it's a characteristic of us. And so some of them aren't as obvious. maybe people say it's obvious with me. Some people don't know. I mean, guys do ask me to dance at the church dances, so can't be all that obvious. But yeah, nobody's gonna mistake me for Rebecca here. But it does happen. I think it's because they're old and blind. But
well, Katherine, I'm just curious, like, so you go and you do this transmission, you go and give your testimony, all these different words. I just want to kind of describe some of the responses and reactions you get from people. Just because I imagine you would have heard a lot of different things, and just kind of the reception you got, and also how that helped inform your faith and helped you on your spiritual journey as well.
Oh, it helped so much. I mean, my testimony has only grown over these years. And that's the really amazing thing for me, is that even the process of getting into these things was led spiritually. And the miracles that have happened during these experiences of prayers answered, and meeting people, and where I've been led, and just the events that have happened, I mean, the more cynic could go, oh, that was a coincidence, and that was a coincidence, and that was a coincidence, and that we're all coincidences. And it's like, I'm going, no. You don't have all of those coincidences just happening. That's God. And so God is very much has been there, which people have a hard time wrapping their head around, of like, why would God want this to happen? And so through this, yeah, I've had all of these amazing spiritual experiences, which have developed a stronger, deeper knowledge of God, knowing me and loving me and accepting me for who I am. And through this, and also my faith in the church, because all of this is, delved from being a member of the church, of what I know about the church to be true, and all of that. This wouldn't be happening if I wasn't Mormon. And but on the other hand, yeah, I've been in some wards where they've treated me really crappy. I had a stake president.
I threw my book.
Yeah,
when I read about it, it made me so frustrated.
Well, I think, I think what I was doing rubbed some people the wrong way. Some bishops or stake presidents in that rubbed them the wrong way of their understanding of what I was doing. They never talked to me and asked me what I was doing. Nobody did at all. And so it was like, hey, let's talk about what you're doing, or something like that. And in that respect, and they just jumped to the conclusions of, I have an agenda, and I'm trying to, spread rainbows and sunshine of the LGBT community. I'm an activist and all of that, and not understanding what it was. And I think some people didn't understand. They took it a completely wrong way. And I think it got around. And so when I showed up in places, they knew who I was, and they knew what I was going to do. And so so after several years of doing this, the word had gotten out, and I don't know, put on the church's secret APB, church's top 10 most wanted. There's Katherine at number 8. They got my picture on their phone, so when they're sitting up there on the stand and they're scanning the audience, they go, oh, there's a tall woman who's not too attractive. Let's go to the look. I don't know what happened.
You were stopped at the conference center once. You said in your book that you were actually pulled out of the conference center.
Church security grabbed me at the conference center because they thought I was some woman who caused trouble. It had nothing to do with my transmission. This was that was
interesting.
actually before the transmission. And they pulled me out of they grabbed me in the women's session and pulled me out up to the top to talk to me and wanted to see my ID and all of that. And it was unfortunate because it was about 2 weeks before I got my new birth certificate to get my new driver's license. And so it was still with my dead name and gender. And they looked at it and went, "You're not who we're looking for." And I was just like, what poor woman looks like me? It's just, I feel so bad for her, but what is she doing? So that didn't have anything to do with that. But yeah, as we got towards the end of the transmission, the word had gotten around. And so I found some wards were aware of who I was and they didn't have any trouble at all. And I bore my testimony, and a woman came up to me afterwards and she said, "You're welcome here anytime. We loved your testimony," and all of that. And she gave me a hug, her kids gave me a hug, and she said, "Oh, by the way, I'm the bishop's wife." And it's like, oh, okay. So yeah, message from the bishop, and that is, they were cool with it. Go to another ward and it's no, and they pulled me out of Relief Society. You can't be here. And went to sacrament meeting. The stake president pulled me out and said, "You're not welcome here." And I said, "Well, it says it on the side of the building." And he's like, "You're not." And his counselors closed the doors to the chapel and stood in front of them. And they just, "You're not welcome here. We don't want you here. You need to move on." And it was just sort of like, oh, okay. Wow. I mean, you read about this stuff in the Book of Mormon of how there were congregations where they kicked out the poor and those who didn't dress well enough, and because they're not good enough. And so you have this concept of we're building Zion. I think the Saints had that thing after their treatment in Missouri of, we're going to build Zion here in Nauvoo. And then that didn't work. And they then moved out here 1,000 miles away from everybody. And it's like, we can build Zion finally here where, that Enoch thing of where everybody's good and there's no bad, and and this great society we will build here because there's none of those pagans around, no more, none of those Gentiles who will corrupt us. But then, they quickly found out that, people, the Gentiles did show up in Salt Lake City. And so I understand it of, you want your kids to have a good environment. You want your kids to have good friends who build up the values that you want them to have. You don't want those bad influences. That's why we don't take our kids to certain movies or read certain books and things, because we just don't want those influences on them to start those sins or, or behaviors or whatever, obviously, if you never read a book about being gay, your kid will never turn out gay, right? I mean, that's how that works.
That's the thought.
Why do
you think the messages are so mixed ward to ward? I mean, the church is known for it's correlated, everyone's on the same page. Why ward to ward? A hug and then people barring the door. Why is there this mixed message? And all in the same area of Utah. I mean, we're not going state to state. It's a pretty condensed area, yet building to building, this message is mixed. Why?
Because, I think because organizationally, there are different structures, hierarchy of the church. I think in my case here, even in the small geographic area that I was doing this transmission, you know, some neighborhoods are really more liberal than others, or more conservative. Or in this area, there are areas that are more conservative than the conservative neighborhood next door. You've got multiple levels of being conservative, and that. So I think some of that had to do with it. I think some of it is even above stake presidents, our area authorities, and I think there some area authorities got rubbed the wrong way, which then came down to everything in their area. And yeah, I mean, we talk about this a bit in the church of like, you know, it's, even though we're a church that's led by revelation and prophets, our leaders are still human, and our leaders still have opinions, and some of them are conservative, what we'd say conservatives, and some are liberals. And so they're, even amongst church leaders of bishops and stake presidents and area authorities, you're going to have those which, you know, might have attitudes that were more friendly to a LGBT community than others, and what to do about it. And I think the church is still struggling in a way of, what do you do with people who are LGBT? And I mean, they're still struggling with the gay thing, in that, you know, can you go to a gay wedding? Or, you know, what happens if, you know, a gay couple moves in next door to you? What do you do? You know, how friendly can you be? And there are people who really struggle with that because, you know, especially if they have kids. I don't want this gay couple living next to me because my kids will see that. But then you have some people who are like, I'd love to have that gay couple live next to me because I want my kids to see that, not in a way to emulate that for them to be gay, but just to have that experience and see them as people or whatever. I mean, people come at this from all sorts of different ways of seeing that. And, you know, the church is all over the place with that. And so I think, you know, those different attitudes of what do you do with it. I didn't write about it in the book, but I know back 30 years when me and my wife were first married, you'd probably say that we were very homophobic, which is ironic at the time, being a woman married to a woman. But we talked about this of there in the 90s with AIDS and when gay marriage was really becoming a thing, and states were passing, like Utah passed an amendment to the state constitution barring gay marriage, and laws were going around, and they were talking about an actual amendment to the U.S. Constitution, but which didn't happen. But they then passed that Defense of Marriage Act, or what I think it was called, under Clinton. And that there was that whole thing about gays and marriage huge, and gay relationships then. And as we were talking about that as a couple of what we would do with, you know, if our kids were gay, or, you know, we were invited to a gay marriage, it was just sort of like, no, you know, we don't want that. You know, of course we wouldn't support, you know, show our support of going to a gay marriage, and that, you know, we were faithful Laura Schlesinger listeners to her program back in the day. Mm-hmm. And that. And so, you know, that was someplace you would go. I mean, today I've been to the gay marriages, I've been to the receptions, you know, I've got lots of friends who are gay and married, and that's all fine. I mean, from a religious point of view, I would say I don't support gay marriage, but I don't have a problem with friends who are gay or married or in relationships, and that. So my morality from the church informs me it's wrong. But I mean, people do wrong things all over the place. Even straight people have been known to do things. And so yeah, I would say even back then, you know, because of the time and the situation, yeah, I was probably very homophobic at that point in time because I didn't have an experience. I didn't really ever know anybody who was gay, let alone anybody who was transgender. I mean, I only met my first real transgender person about 8 years ago. And so that was informing, and being able to talk to somebody who had experience and was experiencing what I was. And so that's changed a lot in the last 8 years. But as a member of the church of dealing with that, yeah. I mean, if you ran to me 30 years ago, yeah, I would be not very supportive of a lot of things. And it's like today, yeah, I'm cool with it and can handle it. And I don't have a problem with gay people at all and it's fine. And, but people are at different places in their experiences. And a lot of, I think of that was part of the transmission, as it were, and going to conferences, putting a face on what it means to be transgender that is different from what people see ordinarily. They might be seeing because they've never met somebody who is transgender. They've never seen somebody. They only know what they've seen in the news or what's been said on talk radio. So yeah, so you do have those different opinions in the church and trying to build up Zion. So, you know, I get the people in the ward who are like, I had a guy come on me at April conference and said, he said, I'm from this ward. And I said, oh, and it was the last ward I had been attending. And he said, I'm so glad that you stopped coming to our ward because it wasn't a good influence on the kids. And, you know, I never in that ward did I ever tell anybody I was transgender. I hadn't borne my testimony. I hadn't used the word. I hadn't said anything, let alone to the kids. But, you know, it's in that weird place right now that simply existing, you know, it's like, oh my gosh, there's a Black man sitting in our congregation. You know, oh my God, you know, I'm not saying the church is racist or anything. I'm just saying, you know, there's been points in time in the nation's history or anything where you know, it'd be like, oh my gosh, there's a Black person. I don't know, maybe there's still people today and who might do that, of like, oh my gosh, there's a Black person, of like, we can't have that or something. But it, you know, you get that sort of thing of that. But you know, so it's sort of this thing with me of like, oh my gosh, there's a trans person. And, you know, I don't want that here. You know, there's somebody who's, you know, got a tat sleeve. I don't want my kids to see that. They might think it's a good thing to do. Oh, that person has a mohawk. You know, I don't want my kid to think that's okay or whatever. You know, it's just, it gets into that thing of like, oh my gosh, there's a trans woman. Well, I don't want them to be exposed to that, for them thinking that's okay for them to do. And so they, just by existing, just by being around people, you know, is seen as a bad thing. And I think I talked in my book a little bit about this Zionist thing of like how we've got to make this place, you know, a good place. And it was the parable of the wheat and the tares. There are people who feel like they need to pull up the tares because it's messing up with our wheat field here. We don't want these tares here. And Jesus in that parable says, yeah, don't do it. Yeah, there's going to be tares in the wheat field. And if anybody's going to pull them up, it's going to be me. I'm going to do it. There's a time and place that I'm going to do this, which is at the end of the world, which is in about 80 years. And he's going to do it. And he said, I'm going to do it. I know what I'm doing. I will do it. Take care of it. I will pull up the tares, bind them up, and burn them, and then sift my wheat. And he said, but if you do it, the problem is that when you pull up the tares, you also pull up the wheat. You can't just pull up a tare. Whenever you pull up a tare, you're going to pull up wheat with it. And I think we see that in the church of when you go after that person who you see is not the influence you want. Oh my gosh, there's a trans woman. We must pull that out. Well, when you do that, you're going to pull up wheat around because there's friends, there's family. And so when you go after that gay kid and you treat that gay kid wrong or that trans kid wrong, you alienate their friends, you alienate their family, and you can even alienate all sorts of people. There's damage happening all over the place in how you treat LGBT people in your wards and in your communities. And they probably don't realize it because they feel like they're focused on this. I mean, President Oaks just gave a devotional to young single adults or just young adults. I forget exactly, but a few weeks ago where he specifically talked about transgender and gender dysphoria. And he talked about you need to live the two great commandments of love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And he even sort of admitted in that he leans towards the first of loving God and being judgmental, and living the law is what's important, and truth, because he's a lawyer. And that's how he's trained and things. And the difficulty is knowing how to love. How do you love your neighbors yourself when they're gay or they're trans? What does that mean? And that's where people are at. And the problem is I see the stupidest thing of how I will show love is to preach the truth to them. I will love my gay neighbor by telling them at every opportunity that they are living in sin and that gay marriage is wrong and they shouldn't be gay, or they should be celibate, they should be straight, they should marry a woman, whatever, you know. I will preach the gospel of truth to them of that they are living their life wrong, and that's how I will show love. And that's not really what he's talking about. And he interestingly added a thing, and he said we need to show those people around us who are suffering with gender dysphoria, we need to show them love and dignity. And dignity was a really kind of interesting word to that, because when you need to show somebody dignity, there's an implication there already that you're not treating them good. Because you show dignity to people who are historically or culturally seen as inferior to you. And so you show them dignity to raise them up to your level. And we take away people's dignity when we humiliate them, when we embarrass them, when we enslave them, when we dehumanize them, when we objectify them. Is degrading, pushing people down and not dignifying people. And so I thought that was interesting of like how to use that as a model with people who are LGBT in the church and in your community, are you showing them dignity, or are you dehumanizing them? Are you embarrassing them? I mean, going to a trans woman and saying, you know, you shouldn't transition, or I'm not going to use your pronouns, or I'm not going to recognize you're a woman, and all of that are you really dignifying them? You know, what form of love is that? And I think that was a really great starting point of that. And so I was so happy that President Oaks said that. He is my favorite apostle, ironically enough. He's the worst apostle to everybody else in the LGBT community, but he's my favorite because
your story is remarkable, and it's challenging. It would be very challenging to people who are more conservative, those who are more progressive, those in the church, those in the LGBTQ community. I one of the things that, as my story has, I've told my story on a few places, and I've got a I've got a book deal down the road that's going to be happening where I tell my story. But remember, Rebecca, when I was
then
on
you can be
your
on
program,
my podcast.
Thank you. Rebecca, we did the Christmas episode on Mormonish. Remember how you talked about, like, the holidays? How does one who maybe doesn't have the support system they once had because they've transitioned out of the church and that kind of stuff? I talked about the importance of being able to build your own community, which is kind of what I've been able to do with my channels, build my own community and build your own support system. So, Katherine, the question I have for you is, what kind of community have you built and support system that you have that's able to help you in this journey? Because that's so important. And maybe it's not complete, maybe it's not where you want it to be, but just tell us about the community and the support system that you've been able to build.
Well, that's easy. I don't have one.
Okay.
Do
you recognize the importance of having one? I mean, you need that.
I would love to have one. But I'm sort of like without a family. I mean, my parents are still in denial of it. And my kids are not really fond of being, I don't know what the right word is. But yeah, I don't really see my kids. I don't really see my parents. My parents actually took my ex-wife's side in the whole thing and show her more connection than they do with me. And friends, it's really hard developing friends when you're old.
Mm-hmm.
And especially, being a trans woman. I mean, I've been trying to build it. I've spent the last 4 years in the church's singles program for us ancient people. And amazing. Yeah, I'm not really interested in the guys. I don't find them attractive, but also I can't marry them because the church on church records I'm male. So the church sees me as male. So me being in a relationship with a guy, even if I did find one and I was attracted to him, would bring about awkward conversations with my priesthood leaders. And I really try to keep those to a minimum. And so it's fine. I mean, so they see me as male and I'm looking for another woman, but amazingly, LDS women don't want to date women. I know it's bizarre. And I think it's a fad. It'll end at some point, but and the strange thing is, like, women already have their clique of girlfriends and that they've probably had for decades. And they coming to these singles thing to find a guy to marry. They're not looking to necessarily to come and add another girlfriend, let alone a trans woman to their circle. And so, 4 years in, I know a lot of people, but none of them are a friend really support group. And I don't know. I mean,
well,
maybe I'm trying, but there's so much going against me of this. And I find, people who are affirming and accepting and that, but it's a weird time of life at this age. I mean, things would probably be a lot easier if I was in my 20s or 30s, but at my age, it's kind of, it's really different because the difference in attitude is really between an older generation and the younger generation. And so, I'm trying, but so I've got stories in my book about being in the singles program of the church.
Yes, you do. That was the times when I was throwing it. Are you really starting a podcast? Were you joking,
No.
or are you really starting one?
Never believe anything I tell you.
No. I was going to say, am very new to the podcasting world, and I can't even tell you how many friends and people that I now consider very, very close acquaintances and a support system that have just developed simply by putting your story out there, starting a podcast, talking to people. Steve, like my best friend, didn't even know him like 2 years ago, right?
Yep.
So it is pretty amazing when you have a medium like that, just the people that you meet. So I don't know, you might want to think about doing it. I think you have a
I
lot to
don't know
say,
who
and I
I
think it'd be very interesting.
see. I don't know anybody I would ever have on it. I
Really?
I am not. I am not that much of an extrovert. I'm just or for all I've been called a narcissist, but I'm not. But it's just no. I can't ever see myself doing my own podcast where I want to interview people and go through all of that. And
Okay.
I'm more than willing to be on a podcast. So
There you
keep
go.
those cards
Yeah,
and letters coming. I've got to sell books. No, I don't have to. But it'd be really nice to sell a couple. But yeah, I'm not going to do a podcast.
Okay.
Well,
So-
let me ask God sometime and see what he says.
See,
That's
never
what
say never. I know how you
the
operate.
relay.
I've read your book.
Yeah. So just folks, I just want to, we're gonna have links in the description here for the book, Translucent. And so if there are those of you who'd like to hear more of the story, we just kind of scratched the surface here. There's quite a story here. And this is a very complex story. People want a happy ending at the end. They want, and we will eventually get there, but you're still part of that journey. You're in that, your story is still being told. Your book is still being written, and in one sense as well, as your life story unfolds. And so we're having this conversation with you here. Where do you see yourself 10 years from now?
Dad, I don't know. It could happen. I mean, Steve Jobs died at 55, so but I have no idea where I would like it to be.
Yeah.
I would love to be in a place 10 years from now where I'm happily married to somebody. I actually don't know whether they will be male or female. I can see a future where the church does change my gender marker to female, and I can go to the temple and do all of that, and I can date guys, and I'll talk to my friends to figure out what's attractive about them. And well, I have a lot of lesbian friends who are married to men, and they're making it work. They even though they're only attracted to women, they're actually attracted to the guy. So I think the similar thing can happen to me, is I might find a guy who I can actually be attracted to. I can see a future like that and just be one of a normal LDS woman in the church at that point. Or I can see 10 years the church doesn't do that. They still see me as male, and I have a nice female wife, and we're happy and all of that. And maybe I'm still living under all the restrictions that they have right now, and I can't go to the temple, and I can't go on a senior mission, or and various things. But at the end of the day, to me, as I said in the book, it's like, what's important is living the policies and doctrines of the church as they are now, not as what they will be and not as what they were. Is that at the end of the day, when I die, which could be next month, it could be 10, 15 years from now, I don't know. But when I die, is that I will be judged on whether I kept the faith. Did I endure to the end? Did I, keep the doctrine and the policies and principles of the church? That's where I will be judged on, of what kind of person I was, and did I do the things I was supposed to? And so if the policies and doctrine of the church don't change before I die, then okay, that's what I'm going to keep living. And if they get better for me, then great. Hopefully they don't get worse, but that's I can see a future for me either way. Of I would love to be married to somebody of either gender within the next couple of years and having a wonderful retired life with them. So
Okay. Well,
in the church and going to church
yeah,
and
because
everything.
first and foremost, you are a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and that's central to who you are, and that's your story.
Yeah.
And you got to check it out. The book,
Yeah.
Translucent. We'll have
No,
links.
it's not all the story. You have to read the book, really.
You do have to read the book.
Yep, that's
Yeah.
for sure. Because there's a
So
lot more.
maybe who knows, maybe there'll be a movie.
You never know. So either way, and we'll have you back on to promote the movie. How's that sound?
Oh, that would be so fabulous.
So folks, thanks. I would like to hear your comments. This was a very interesting conversation. I'd love to hear your feedback and kind of tell us your story as well. Perhaps maybe Katherine's story really resonates with you and you want to share your story. Please do that in the comments section. And just a reminder real quick, don't forget our merch store is mormonbookreviews.com. We got ourselves hot chocolate mugs, not coffee mugs, hot chocolate mugs. We got ball caps. We got ourselves, we even got, even got mouse pads, whatever. And so check out Mormon Book Reviews at mormonbookreviews.com. And that's our merch store. For those of you who would also like to financially support the channel, I have links in there for Venmo, PayPal, as well as for Patreon. And so we do appreciate all the financial support we get for this program. Couldn't do it without you. Rebecca, thanks for co-hosting today.
Oh, you're so welcome. What an interesting episode.
And Katherine, a real pleasure. Thanks for taking the time to do this today.
Oh, I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's been great. Thank you so much for having me on.
That's great. So just remember, folks, this is the most important thing is, remember, all the voices of the restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews.